I didn't find out about the affair late. I found out early enough to stop it if I had wanted to. And that's the part that changes everything. There were signs before anything became obvious. Small inconsistencies that didn't match. Timelines that didn't align. Details that felt slightly off in ways most people would ignore. I didn't ignore them. I followed them quietly until they confirmed what I already suspected. And when I knew for certain, I didn't confront him. I didn't ask questions. I didn't give him a chance to explain. Because the moment you confront someone like that, you end the version of them that makes mistakes. They become careful, controlled, harder to understand. And I wasn't interested in catching him cheating. I was interested in understanding exactly who he was when he thought no one was watching. So I stayed. Not as a wife, but as an observer. I let him believe everything was normal. That nothing had changed. That whatever he was doing existed in a space I couldn't see. And the more comfortable he became, the more he revealed. Patterns replaced excuses. Behavior replaced words. And every inconsistency turned into something measurable. By the time he finally admitted to cheating, it wasn't new information to me. It was confirmation of something I had already mapped out in detail. He thought he was confessing. I knew he was just catching up. And by then, the situation wasn't something I was reacting to anymore. It was something I was already preparing to end. I didn't wait for him to introduce her into my life. I found her first. That was the point where this stopped being about reacting and started becoming about control. It didn't take long once I knew where to look. Patterns lead to places. And places lead to people. When I reached out to her, I didn't tell her who I was immediately. I asked questions instead. Small ones at first. Enough to confirm what I needed without revealing what I already knew. And the more she spoke, the clearer everything became. He hadn't just lied to me. He had built an entirely separate version of himself for her. Different timeline. Different promises. Same outcome. She didn't know about me the way I didn't know about her. At least not at the beginning. That was what made it work for him. Two controlled realities that never touched. Until they did. When I finally told her who I was, I expected resistance. Denial. Maybe even anger. I didn't get any of that. What I got instead was hesitation. The kind that only happens when someone realizes their reality doesn't match the one they were given. We compared details. Dates. Conversations. Plans he had made to both of us. Identical in structure but separated just enough to avoid overlap. That was when the situation changed completely. Because it was no longer about betrayal. It was about pattern. And patterns can be predicted. If you were in this position, would you expose him immediately? Or stay quiet and let him destroy himself? Comment your choice. She asked me what I was going to do. I told her the truth. Nothing. Not yet. Because stopping him early would protect him. It would give him a chance to adjust. To minimize. To deny. And I wasn't interested in any of that. I was interested in letting him continue long enough to remove every possible defense. By the time he realized anything was wrong, there wouldn't be anything left for him to control. We didn't expose him. That would have been the obvious move. And obvious moves are easy to counter. Instead, we agreed on something far more effective. We let him continue. She stayed exactly where he expected her to be, responding the same way, playing the same role, giving him no reason to question anything. And I did the same. Nothing changed on the surface. That was the key. Because control only works when the person holding it believes nothing has shifted. And he believed that completely. The more secure he felt, the less careful he became. Messages started overlapping. Promises repeated with small variations. Plans that didn't quite align, but were close enough that he assumed no one would notice. But we noticed everything. Not emotionally. Not reactively. But systematically. Dates. Times. Language. The way he adjusted his tone depending on who he was speaking to. The way he framed himself differently depending on what he needed. It stopped feeling personal after a while. It became predictable. And predictability is what turns behavior into evidence. She started documenting on her side. I did the same on mine. Screenshots, call logs, patterns of absence, even small inconsistencies that didn't matter individually but became undeniable when placed together. The more he talked, the more he built something that could stand without us. That was the goal. Not to prove he cheated, to prove how he operated, because once you understand someone's pattern, you don't interrupt it. You let it expand until it becomes too large to deny. By the time he thought he was managing 2 lives successfully, both of those lives had already aligned against him. He just didn't know it yet. When I got pregnant, he thought it simplified everything, that it anchored me in place, made me easier to control, less likely to leave. What he didn't understand was that it changed the situation in a way he couldn't see. The complications were real. The bleeding, the warnings from doctors, the constant reminder that this wasn't stable. But instead of breaking me, it clarified everything. Because every time he chose to be somewhere else, every time he ignored a call, every time he treated something serious like it didn't matter, it became part of a pattern that could be measured. Neglect isn't just absence. It's repetition. And repetition creates structure. He continued building his other life at the same time, moving between both of us like nothing overlapped, like nothing could connect. But by then, everything was already connected. We weren't reacting anymore. We were documenting, and then he made the mistake that ended it. At the restaurant, when he tried to force control back into a situation he was losing, he crossed a line he couldn't step back from. The moment he put his hands on me, the situation stopped being complicated. It became defined: witnesses, physical impact, medical follow-up. That wasn't just an incident. It was the final piece. Because up until that point, everything could have been argued, explained, minimized. But not that. Not when it was seen. Not when it was recorded in the way it needed to be. From that moment on, we weren't building a case anymore. We were confirming it. And confirmation doesn't move forward. It waits for the right moment to be used. The dinner wasn't for closure. It wasn't even for confrontation. It was for alignment. Every version of his life in one place. Every narrative forced to exist in the same room at the same time. That was something he had spent months avoiding without realizing it. I invited everyone. His family. And her. He thought it meant I was finally ready to accept what he wanted. That I had reached the point where resistance turned into compromise. That was the version he needed to believe for everything to work. When I arrived, I didn't react to anything. Not him. Not her. Not the way his family avoided looking at me directly. I took my seat like everything was normal. Because control comes from consistency, not intensity. When everyone settled, I stood up slowly, not to demand attention, but to take it without asking. Before we start, I said, my tone even. There's something you all need to know. Then I told them I lost the baby. I didn't rush it. I let the silence expand. Let it settle into something real before I continued. Then I explained why. Not emotionally, structurally, the complications, the absence, the incident. Each detail placed exactly where it belonged. I could see the shift immediately. Not just in him, but in all of them. Because for the first time, they weren't dealing with separate pieces of information. They were seeing the full structure. Then I turned slightly toward her. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because her presence alone confirmed what I hadn't said out loud. That she wasn't there as his partner anymore. She was there as part of what came next. And in that moment, everything he thought he controlled stopped belonging to him. By the time it reached court, there was nothing left to argue. That was the part most people misunderstand. They expect confrontation, emotion, something dramatic that shifts the outcome. But outcomes don't shift at that stage. They confirm what has already been built. Every message, every timeline, every inconsistency had already been structured into something that didn't require interpretation. My lawyer didn't need to push. She just presented. Step by step. Clean. Irrefutable. He tried it first. Denial. Then justification. Then blame. The usual sequence people follow when they realize control is gone but haven't accepted it yet. None of it held. Because consistency is impossible when the truth has already been mapped out from multiple angles. The ruling wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It was final. Divorce granted. Financial compensation secured. Protection enforced. That was the legal ending. But the real ending had already happened before we ever stepped into that room. Because the last thing he didn't understand wasn't that I knew. It was that he was never the only one being watched. The woman he thought he had chosen over me had already stepped away. Not out of loyalty. Not out of guilt. But because she understood something he didn't. That this was never about him choosing between two women. It was about what happens when both of them stop being options. And by the time he realized that, there was nothing left to choose. So be honest. Is this justice? Or is this control taken too far? And would you have played along this long just to destroy someone completely? Drop your answer below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications.